Welcome back to the basement. I'm Steve Lewis. I recently had a chance to chat with our friend David Leaf, author of God Only Knows, Brian Wilson, the Beach Boys, and the California Myth, professor at the Herb Alpert School of Music at UCLA, and notably, particularly for this conversation, the filmmaker behind the 2004 documentary Beautiful Dreamer, Brian Wilson and the Story of Smile. Of course, the talk centers on David's upcoming book. I want to get as much of this conversation in as possible, so we'll take it in two parts. Now, please enjoy part one of my discussion with David Leaf. So I'm here today with author, professor, and filmmaker David Leaf, a legend in Beach Boys circles, to talk about his new book, Smile, The Rise, Fall, and Resurrection of Brian Wilson, which is to be released on April 15th. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. It's great to be with you, Steve.
The book is fascinating, and what I found especially compelling were the sections on the Smile sessions in 1966-67, and particularly on the resurrection of Smile in 2003-2004.
Certainly the resurrection was the easiest part for me to do, in a sense. None of it was easy, but because I was there in 2003, 2004, making Beautiful Dreamer, I was a fly on the wall. And I had done extensive interviews with everybody in the band and went back and did new interviews, retrospective interviews with the living band members, as well as I did 25 new interviews for the book with people who I had not spoken with for the film, because when you make a documentary, it's going to be maybe an hour and 40 or something like that. You talk to somebody and 98% of what they say ends up on the cutting room floor, or it doesn't get into the film at all. And so there was this enormous body of material that existed from 2004. And when I said to the editor-in-chief at Omnibus Books to follow up God Only Knows, I wanted to do a book for the 20th anniversary of Brian Wilson Presents Smile. And he said, "What do you have in mind?" And I said, "Well, I have all of these interviews. I'd like to do a compilation of these interviews." And he said, "No, interview books don't do well for us." And so I said, "Okay, well, what does that mean?" He says, "Well, oral histories do well for us. I think oral histories would be great." And I just thought to myself, oh God, this is so much work to try to figure out which pieces of which interviews go in which order and who do I need to talk to. And I really didn't want to write about 66 and 67 again. I felt I had done that back when I wrote The Beach Boys and the California Myth, and that now that book was back in print as part of God Only Knows, and I spend time on the kind of the rise and fall in Beautiful Dreamer, I didn't want to revisit that era. It's so painful, most of all for Brian. And he said, you have to contextualize it. This can't just be a pure celebration. We have to know why this is a big deal that he did this in 2004. We have to hear that story. And so, okay, I got to work. And one of my goals with the book was that people who knew nothing about Beach Boys, who knew nothing about Brian Wilson, who maybe knew nothing about Smile, might look at the cover and see the title and pick it up and be interested. Like, what is this? And as they start to flip through it, they see a chapter called Smile in a Nutshell. So like in 2 pages, I've outlined what the book is going to be. Yeah. And somebody might read that and go, huh, this really is, I want to read this story. And so I did that. I didn't know I was going to do that, but I did that. And then I think I began the next chapter by saying we have to get to 1966 as quickly as possible. So here goes. There have been so many books now about the Beach Boys, full-on biographies, whatever. You can go to Wikipedia and read the Beach Boys story if that's what you want to read. So I knew I needed to explain simply what had happened in the years prior to 66, setting up why 1966 was this essential year, what I think I refer to as annus miraculous. This guy writes, arranges, and produces that sounds good vibrations and music of Smile all in 1 year. And then what happens? So that's what I did. And it was very, very difficult to do it in a way that was different. I'd already done it. I said, okay, let's take a fresh approach to it and try to figure out how to do it. And the gift that the gift that I had was these extensive interviews with the players. And because I asked Van Dyke Parks to do a new interview, and he was like, no. And he just he didn't want. He's talked out on the subject. And I looked at his interview from 2004, just prior to the world premiere, and I emailed him. I said, Van Dyke, thank you so much for not doing a new interview, because the interview you gave me back then has all the tension in the world of what's going to happen. It has his fresh emotions. And I think maybe the thing I'm proudest of in the telling of this book, we know what's going to happen. But when you're reading those chapters in 2003, 2004, before Brian walks up the steps of the Royal Festival Hall, bows to the audience right and left, there's this year of tension. What is going to happen? Nobody knows.
Yeah, it
I,
really
I don't
comes through in
know.
the book. It's kind of like that Apollo 13 movie. You know they're going to get home, but the tension is still there. And it works the same in the book. There is a palpable tension about how this is going to go down.
Well, thank you for finding it and saying that. It's a great analogy. I had no idea it was going to be there. And one of the things when one does a book, you submit it, and then it goes to a copy editor who does a great job. She was amazing. And then it comes back, and then you make some more changes, and it goes to the copy editor. It comes back. I don't know how many times I've read the book before it finally before the editor in chief finally says, "Okay, if we're going to get this out, it has to go to the printing press." Each time I read the book, I felt that tension, and it really was shocking to me.
Yeah. And there's so many details there, particularly from Van Dyke Parks, I thought, about all the machinations that went on, things that there obviously were not time to deal with in Beautiful Dreamer. I'm so glad that those interviews and those quotes didn't just languish in the can somewhere. It
That
really,
that was one of the that was a driving force in getting this book done. And I had forgotten how great Dury Parks's interview was, Van Dyke's first wife. I had forgotten Annie Wilson's interview.
Mhm.
So there's all this material, and I had kind of a rule in my head in doing this book that if I couldn't either hear it or see it in video, I couldn't include it. I didn't want somebody to say, "Oh, you misquoted me." I didn't want any of that. It had to be real, and of course the challenges there were epic, because when I asked the Beach Boys manager if the surviving Beach Boys could do an interview, the answer was, well, no, we've got this book with Genesis, and we can't do interviews for another book.
Yeah.
And so I had to find material from each of them that fit the book. Fortunately, they had done promotional interviews for the Smile box set. There wasn't very much contemporaneous interview material. It doesn't seem like Carl ever spoke at great length about anything. Um, Certainly not Smile. Uh, Dennis had a couple of great quotes, but it was absolutely essential that they be included for obvious reasons. They're the musical instrument, they're the vocal blend that Brian had to have. And there's no question that they sing magnificently on the original Smile sessions.
It must
But
have been an incredibly daunting thing to put together an oral history from all these quotes. Did it ever occur to you that here you are taking all these bits and pieces, some are new and some are old, and construct and finding a way to construct them in a coherent order in a book about Smile? It seems like a very apt way to write about Smile.
it did. I think I actually mention it. And I think there's a line in the book where I said, not in terms of the ambition or genius of Smile, but This putting this book together felt like, okay, I've got all these pieces. How do I put them together in a way that's coherent, that will make sense, that will make the reader want to read the book more than once? Because those of us who are, as the late great Bob Haynes, I think, nicknamed us the Brianistas, as those of us for whom smile has been this important part of our life, the holy grail of rock, as it has been called. In Beautiful Dreamer, I had a section with a few people just prior to the first concert. And I just love the guys. I'm going to have my life pre-smile and I'm going to have my life post-smile.
Yeah.
And that, I think that's what inspired me to solicit uh, commentary from people who were there in 2004. Send me an email 20 years later, and there's an entire chapter of people who were there looking back on that experience and telling their story. Because one of the things that I say pretty early on in the book is essentially I've had my say about Smile, and it's time for everyone else to be heard. And that includes the fans, that includes the critics, that includes the people who were there in 66, 67, obviously, and Brian's band, as well as the guy who was at the soundboard, etc. I mean, there's so many Smile stories. And I wanted to gather as many of them as I could in one place and make it as readable as I could. And, in talking to certain people, I realized that just a single quote from them wouldn't do. So the idea of an anthology came to me. So there's a mini anthology of a dozen essays in the back of the book from people for whom Smile internationally, from the UK, England and Scotland, and from America, uh, have something to say about what Smile means to them. Beginning that section with an essay from Tom Nolan, whose Rolling Stone article in 1971 is the one that sent me on the journey, and ending that section with a beautiful, heartfelt essay from a young writer whose two songs, Till I Die and Surf's Up, are the ones that, well, I don't want to spoil what she wrote about them, but those were the two songs that really set me on the journey. Because when I heard those songs in 1971, it was okay, Till I Die. This is one of the saddest songs I've ever heard, one of the most beautiful songs I've ever heard. But it also told me that, oh, he can still do it. And
Yeah.
then comes Surf's Up. And it was like, okay, this is more beautiful than what I'm reading about. And in kind of a selfish way, I want to hear all the rest of it. Where's the rest of it? I want to hear Smile.
Well, thanks for going and tracking it down and helping to get it done.
In my documentary class at UCLA, the last week of the quarter, I show Beautiful Dreamer, and I tell the students, we're going to watch it, and then I'm going to tell you a story afterwards. And after they've watched the film, and I said, so the reason I'm telling you this now, as opposed to before you watch the movie, is I want you to understand that when I was sitting where you are now, when I was 19 years old, and when I found out about Brian Wilson, and I somehow got it in my head that I was going to move to California, write a book about Brian, become his friend, and help him finish Smile. That you UCLA students, who are among the smartest students in the country, if not the world, there isn't anything you can't do.
Yeah.
And I say, now, had I known it was going to take 33 years, I'm not so sure.
Yeah.
Uh, but I say it's a joke because I never thought it was going to happen.
Right.
And there were so many steps along the way, little baby steps and then major steps that it all seems impossible.
Well, I think that's one of the things that I really appreciated about the book is that it recounts those steps, the Smile stuff that came out on the box set, Brian starting to perform heroes and villains, and really kind of filled in for me what has always been sort of a gap in my understanding, how we got from Brian reintroducing some Smile era material into his live set to suddenly saying, I'm going to perform Smile at the Royal Festival Hall.
Well, we were living it. So retrospectively, it was easy to kind of connect the dots. I remember the late great Andy Paley and I worked on a track listing for the Good Vibrations box set. And I went up to Brian's house and I went over the track listing with him. And there was one song he asked to take out. He said, I don't want that on there. It's okay. Then I kind of took a deep breath and I said, hey, Brian, there's this giant hole in the track listing between the Good Vibrations single and the Heroes and Villains single. And he said, well, what do you mean? I said, well, that 6 or 7 months, however long it was that you were working on Smile, we really should have some material from Smile to represent that part of the career. And he said, okay,
Yeah.
what songs what
Yeah.
songs do you think it should be? And it wasn't difficult to rattle off the ones that had been bootlegged that we had heard that were almost finished. I purposely did not mention Mrs. O'Leary's Cow because I didn't want to have him set fire to the track listing. you, you know, it was like, I'm not going to roll those dice because
Right.
I didn't think it was as important to the career retrospective that we hear that compared to Wonderful and Surf's Up and Heroes and Villains and everything. So between what we got onto that disc and then the work tapes that made it onto the bonus disc, I think there's close to an hour of Smile era music on the
Yeah.
box set. So that was a real point of pride for all of us involved. Mark Lynette did a great job. And it went gold,
Yeah.
which for box sets is a big deal. And I wasn't thinking about anything more than, again, I'm a fan. I want to hear this music. So that was what I thought would be the last step. And then in the course of the next couple of years, there were two other things that I did. We were up at the house one night, and I think Eva was talking to Melinda. I went into the kitchen with Brian, and I had written on index cards the names of every known Smile song, and we put them on the table and we tried to sequence it. And the reason we were doing this was that he and I had gone to Capitol Records, discussed with them a kind of 5-year plan because the Good Vibrations box set had been so successful. It was, well, let's do a 30th anniversary collection every year. Every spring we'll do a big box, and then every October a 2 CD set. May 96 was going to be the Pet Sound Sessions box set. October 96 was going to be a 2 CD Good Vibration Sessions. Then in the spring of 97 would be the Smile Sessions box set, and on for 5 years. I don't remember the name of the person we met with at Capitol. It might have been Hale Milgram. He was like president of Capitol. So when I called to get a meeting, it was like Brian Wilson's coming to the tower, and now Brian Wilson's coming to talk to the at the tower about That Sounds and Smile. I mean, it was just like
Yeah.
it was pretty amazing. And so we walked out of there with, pretty excited. And I don't remember whether it was before or after that meeting that we did this thing at his kitchen table, trying to sequence the songs from Smile to no avail. There was no way to do it. And we didn't try for that long. It wasn't like we spent 4 hours.
Sure.
But what I said to him in that same era is, this music is too important to be locked away.
Yeah. And that's where we'll leave it for this week. I want to thank David once again for a fascinating conversation. I hope you'll join me next week for part 2, where we will continue to discuss David's book and the amazing sequence of events leading up to the resurrection of Smile. Meanwhile, have a great week. Thanks very much for watching. Bye.